And I'm going to just give you a bit of an outline of what to expect today before we jump into introductions to the fabulous women that have agreed to have the conversation with us today. Just to give you some idea of what this hour will be comprised of after some introductions and an initial question to our guests. We basically have two questions that we really want to discuss. And after the first question, we'll have a bit of a conversation between our guests, a bit of dialogue, and then we're actually going to take a short break and review some comments that are in the chat. If we have some time, we'll actually unmute a few people and see if there's further comments or questions. I want to be mindful of time. And then we have a second question where we're going to dig in a little bit deeper into our conversation. And again, it's about 20 minutes of each. Then we'll take a short break and have a look at our chat, see what questions or comments have come in, which is why I'd love you to get familiar with it. And again, we're just going to see how time goes today. If we can unmute some of you, and we'll do that as well and get some comments and questions in. But as this is our first webinar, we're very much playing this one by ear. So please help me to time manage the 60 minutes well. The event planner hat is on, and away we go. I am Charlene Sanjenko, and I'm the founder and CEO of PowHERhouse Media. And for any of you who know me well, you know that one of the things I am most passionate about is surrounding myself with powerful women. And I will find them, and I will befriend them, and I will ask for help and guidance. It's one of the things I love to do. And over the last few years, I've really craved conversation and impactful discussions and wisdom from women that I feel are either on the same path as me, perhaps slightly ahead of me on the path, perhaps a mile ahead or a couple of chapters ahead, maybe a little bit behind, but I've really been craving very substance-driven conversation on some very particular topics. And it's really driven the media business, whether we're convening powerful women in a magazine to have discussions and bring about conversation digitally, or we're gathering them in a live event. You know, it's all about convening powerful women for impact. So I want to welcome our three guests today, and I'm just going to read their short bios, and then I have a question to welcome each of them. So I think you probably read it on the event information, but as a way to kick us off, and in my gratitude, I want to welcome Fiona McFarlane, who should be on everyone's top left. I'm thinking we all see the same thing. Managing partner in British Columbia of Ernst & Young, and the Chief Inclusiveness Officer at Ernst & Young. I'm going to also welcome you, right just on your screen below Fiona is Margot McAuliffe. Now Margot is joining us, and she is from Calgary. She's the founder and CEO of Gabriella's Kitchen, and she is also the CEO of Subway Developments. That is the development agent for Subway Restaurants, the brand here in Western Canada. And Lisa Rogers, who you'll see in our center, I feel like it's Hollywood Squares, in our center square, is joining us today from Victoria. And Liza is the founder of REN, which is the Women's Real Estate Network, and she's the producer of the upcoming Victoria Real Estate Expo, which is coming up in March. So I want to welcome the group of three ladies that are joining us today. My goal was to get a very diverse cross-section of women to kick off the conversation, which is called Women Built to Scale, Scaling Your Growth, Scaling Your Impact in 2018. And ladies, I want to thank you for being on the webinar, and to start the conversation, to ask you why, basically why you said yes. Why you said yes to being here today, giving up an hour of your time, and why you feel it's an important dialogue to be had. And I'm going to start with Fiona, if that's okay. Just simply by way of introduction, if there's anything I missed in your bio that you think's relevant, please feel free to add it.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. The reason I'm passionate about this topic is size matters. And the Bank of Canada has shown that larger companies that have scaled up, pay higher wages, do more R&D, export more, and are more productive. And so Canada has an innovation and a productivity challenge. And so if we can scale up our businesses, it'll make life a lot more affordable for everybody, and we'll become more productive and be able to have a healthier society. And at EY, we run the Entrepreneur of the Year program. And it's always my, real disappointment that more women entrepreneurs aren't A, applying, and B, when they do apply, they often don't win purely for a lack of scale. And so if there's anything that we can do to contribute to the conversation that advances it, we're all in.
Great. Thank you very much. And Margot, I'm going to ask you, I've been chasing you for a while, and thank you for being here today. And I'm wondering why this conversation is important for you to be a part of.
So for me, it's more personal than what Fiona described. I believe in the power of the collective. And I believe that women can help each other succeed. So I've been in business for a very long time. And when I started out in business, we didn't have a lot of support from females. Part of that was because, it was such a long time ago that there weren't a lot of women in the C-suite. There weren't a lot of women in powerful positions, and there weren't a lot of role models. That's changed now, and, I think that's fantastic. It hasn't changed enough, but at least we're going in the right direction. And I think that if we can work together, if we can show other women what is possible, and if we can help each other along the way with some very simple things, behaviors and attitudes and approach to business and life, I think we can make a difference and keep on improving the lot of women in business and scaling our businesses and making a difference.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I tend to agree with that. And Liza, I'm going to ask you that same question. Thanks for being here. And why did you say yes to being part of it?
Absolutely. So I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm kind of I wouldn't quite say at the start of my business journey. I've been an entrepreneur for quite a while. But it is that camaraderie. When you're a solopreneur, when you're an entrepreneur, you need to have other people to work with, and you want people who are on the same path as you and who you connect with and who you can share with and who will forgive you when things aren't perfect but push you forward. And I think that's one of the things that as women, there have been roles that women have played over the last number of years, and what we're finding now is that we are finally getting to a point now where we're really starting to support each other. And we're realizing that by lifting each other up rather than trying to push each other down, we all win. Our families win, our friends win, our communities win. And so I'm really on a mission to try to help elevate the conversation, get women more inspired, get them to realize they don't need to be perfect. If you take a look at my websites, you'll know that pretty fast because done is better than perfect. Moving forward is a success. And all of us working together and helping each other move in the same direction is just so inspiring and helps all of us just take those steps that we need to take to keep getting ahead and be able to scale up so that we can win those Entrepreneur of the Year awards when we've been able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Well, and it's quite a broad topic. I know even in conversations with these three women, it's quite a broad topic. So I wanted to be very clear that the end goal for me today for having this conversation is to walk away with a clear roadmap, some ideas of behavioral changes that could be implemented by women to move forward faster. So again, these are things that we have control over. What could we do differently? What actions could we take differently? What do we need to talk about more that is not being talked about? So those are the real concrete things that I'm listening for. And I know that they'll come from stories and ideas and anecdotes of the people that, women that have walked before us. Now, if you have a comment or a question as it comes up, don't be afraid to add it to the comments, add it to our chat box. We will take a break and read them all at once so that we're not distracted. But I will just finish off the introduction section by saying, quite honestly, I've been in business for myself for very close to 20 years. I can't believe I'm saying that. So in 2000, I started my business. I'm quite surprised, as someone as driven as I am, I'm quite surprised that I haven't seen, and it's this individual and collective conversation, quite surprised that it's taken 20 years for myself to go further than I thought that I would, but also collectively, I'm quite surprised that women haven't moved forward faster in 20 years than I've observed them. So there has been some movement, definitely, as Margot said, but not fast enough for me. And so in my mind, it's like, okay, then what needs to change? What are the conversations that need to be had? What are the actions that need to be taken that aren't being taken? I'm curious. I'm curious if I'm the only one that feels this way, or if there are other women that agree with this. So we're gonna continue to frame the conversation by the first question, actually. So the first question that I've posed to our guests, and you can be thinking about it as well. So if women are going to be bigger, bolder, and braver, if they're going to act in a way in order to scale their growth, to scale their impact, what does that specifically look like to you? How would you most like to see this scaling show up? What is the real tangible evidence that we in fact have scaled? So if we woke up tomorrow morning and said, woohoo, we've done it. We've done it in the next 10 years, the next 5 years. What is it that we have done, and what is it that we would be seeing that we don't see right now? And I'm just asking that question to kind of make sure that we're all on the same page. And if we're not on the same page, that's okay. I'd just love to know that. So again, I'm going to ask Fiona. I think I know the direction that she's going to go in, but I'm going to ask Fiona to say, what specifically does that look like to you, scaling their growth, scaling their impact, that you're looking to see from women across Canada?
Well, I think I'm looking to see brand names being run and owned by women. The visibility of women-owned businesses. When you look in the media, so often you just see male CEOs, and certainly when you look at public companies, which is the data that's more readily accessible, you see that there really are very few CEOs. It's under 3% of public company CEOs are women. And so I would like to see that dramatically changed. One of the data points that I found particularly both encouraging and disturbing was the World Economic Forum has actually ranked Canada #1 for gender parity in education. So we're top of the world. We reached gender parity in 2013, but in the last 10 years, we've dropped 21 spots in other economic empowerment, as it were, of women in Canada. And so that's a huge waste of talent and opportunity and the kind of brain power that can drive our economy. So that's what I would like to see, is a lot more women-owned businesses that have recognized brands.
Great. Margot, I'm wondering what angle you would take with that. What does it look like and feel like to you once we have scaled? We've hit some success.
So to me, it's about changing the dialogue. So once we hit success, the dialogue will be different. And it reminds me of an analogy to the sports world, and particularly in football. And I know nothing about football. I don't remember the team and I don't remember the coach, but I remember the story where my son was telling me once that there was a coach who scolded his team because they would celebrate in the end zone every time they made a touchdown. And he wanted them to have the mentality that, touchdowns is what we do. So we don't need to celebrate. Let's just get right back at it and let's just do another or make another touchdown. So to me, it's about, let's not celebrate every time women, and I mean, let's celebrate today, but in the future, when we know we've scaled, it's when we don't celebrate that a woman has been elevated to the C-suite, right? When it's so commonplace that, it's just like nobody blinks, right? It's about, not fearing that our daughters and granddaughters are going to hit the glass ceiling, because there is no glass ceiling, right? It's about, we don't talk about the lack of gender parity because it's just commonplace. Everybody knows that women are CEOs, and we represent half the board members on public company boards, and we're getting venture capital funding as much as, if not more than men. That's what it looks like to me in the future. And I'll just tell you a little story. Years ago, when my son was small, he's 27 now, he was probably 6 or 7 at the time. Our neighbor, she was a lawyer, and her husband was an accountant. And when I asked her son, who was my son's friend, what he wanted to do when he grew up, he said he wanted to be an accountant. And I said, oh, why not a lawyer? And he said, oh, that's women's work. It's about attitude, right?
Totally. That's great. Oh, I love it. And I really appreciate the football story. Thank you. Thank you.
And some would say it's not a glass ceiling, it's just a thick layer of men.
Yeah, exactly. Push them out of the way.
I'm gonna pass it over to Liza, and I just wanted to make 2 really quick comments because it hit really hard. For me, it is visibility. Fiona mentioned it's not that there aren't women out there that are doing absolutely incredible things. There are. They're just not as visible as they need to be. And to Margot's point, quite honestly, I've gotten flack many different times and ways from many different people. Well, why are you so focused on women? I will be so focused on women until there's no need for me to be focused on women. What people don't actually realize is I'm the biggest tomboy out there. So it would be, it'd be my pleasure not to be so focused on women. But until there's no longer a need, and we don't need to celebrate every single touchdown because it's just what we do. It's just what we do. Yeah, I love that. Liza, what are your thoughts? What does it look like?
Yes, well, it's interesting because the glass ceiling analogy is something that I use with my women's real estate network. And of course, we came up with this great tagline, and it was my young male assistant who came up with the glass ceiling tagline. And it says, the glass ceiling is an open skylight when you own the building. So we use that a lot because really the glass ceiling may still exist, but if it becomes something that we just own, it changes the dynamic of what it is. And so again, talking about reflecting on stories and how I've scaled up things and how I'm changing things in my situation. The Expo and the Women's Real Estate Network are perfect examples of how I was in a situation where I started this women's real estate network, and I had the guys saying, oh, why are you just helping women? And then when I decided to satisfy the requests that I was getting from all the men in my life, and I said, fine, I'll produce a real estate expo and we'll invite everybody, I had men saying to me, well, who are you to produce a real estate expo? Mm-hmm. And I actually had those statements coming at me. And so there are so many things that I take from that. And I think if I'm looking in the future, and I'm already kind of there because I started a lot of this last year, and this year in producing the expo, some of those same people who said, well, who are you to produce an expo, are now my biggest cheerleaders. So it's taking those people who weren't supportive and questioned what you were doing, and really kind of just owning it and saying, well, I don't need to answer to anybody. You know, as we've talked about, not, you know, if so many women are CEOs and so many women are successful, we don't need to have a reason for it. And so that's kind of where I'm stepping into now, is I don't need to be apologetic. I don't need to have an explanation, because I've done it now. And those people who at the beginning were kind of naysayers are now my biggest cheerleaders. And they don't even question, oh, well, it's a woman producing a real estate expo. They're like, Liza's producing the real estate expo and nobody could do it better than her. So that gender thing has gone in less than a year. So I think, yeah, the future is not allowing those little setbacks that come along to keep us where we are, because moving through those little setbacks are taking us to the future. And I think we are finally starting to get there at a pace that is reasonable. We're not as choked back and as slowed down, because there seems to be this momentum and this wave that we're riding, and we're landing on the beaches of the future much quicker than we would have even a couple of years ago.
Thank you. So I'm going to take a few minutes, and I'm going to do something quite brave and unmute you all. And now what I'd love to do is, if someone has a burning question or a comment, not everybody's camera is on, and that's fine. But if I can't see you, then I'm going to ask you to type your comment or question into the chat. But if you do have something that you'd like to add, or you'd like a burning question that you would like to ask, now would be the time. We're going to take just a few minutes, and I'm just going to unmute you. And I'm wondering if anyone has. Oh, see, I'm not sure I can do that. Yeah, I'm okay. Sorry, I don't want to give you all feedback. I'm wondering if anyone has, and if you'd like to stay muted, just mute yourselves. If anybody has a comment or a question that you'd like to include in this part of the dialogue, feel free to type, or feel free to jump in.
Question.
Yeah. Yes, we can.
First
Thanks,
of all,
Tina.
thank you very much. Just the information that's coming, perspective and dialogue and different way of communicating, and the glass ceiling. I really appreciate what I'm hearing. Here's my question. My question is, in terms of bringing women up, when you have a difficult conversation, do you believe in how do you keep that clarity? Do you have to manage your emotions? How do you manage difficult conversations with men about women doing their own thing? I'm just curious about that.
I can actually volunteer a story if you like.
Great, Margot.
When I was a senior executive in a large public company, I was in a meeting with the then CEO and a couple board members, and I can't remember who else was in the meeting. And I don't even remember what happened. I just remember that somehow or other the CEO said something rude to me or lashed out at me, and I was brought to tears. So I didn't cry in the meeting, but I excused myself. I went to the washroom. I cried in the washroom, and then I went back to the meeting and, kind of pulled my act together. And then at the end of the day, I had made up my mind that I wanted to speak to him about what he had said to me. And so I asked him if he would meet with me at the end of the day, and he said yes. And so at the end of the day, I went in to see him, and I said to him, I made it about myself, right? And I said to him, when you speak to me that way, I feel disempowered, I feel devalued, and I feel like I ought not to participate. And so what I tried to do was draw a line in the sand as to how I wanted to be spoken to. And, he actually was very magnanimous, and he apologized, and he never spoke to me that way again.
Good.
And so I think, what Dana is asking is, do we act authentic? Do we act ourselves? And I think we do. I think there's a place, to actually start weeping. And I don't think it's in the boardroom. So I don't think you scold yourself for being who you are. And I'm highly emotional. So, go out and do what you have to do, and then come back knowing that, it's not about you, it's about them, and draw your line in the sand in a very calm way. It worked for me.
Yeah, I have the same kind of thing. I'm also emotional. I cry at the airport when I just see other people saying goodbye to people. So
I think that's okay.
What I've done, because I am a crier, and I cry not because I'm sad, but usually because I'm frustrated. And so if I know that I'm going into a situation where I could lose it, I said to my partners before, well, I may cry, and I cry because it's the alternative to punching you in the face. and would you rather that I cried or had a cardiac infarction? So that's just like get over it.
Right.
And explain that it's not a question of being powerless. It's just a question of how you deal with frustration, and everybody's different. And actually, funnily enough, in my 31 years at the firm, I've had more men cry in my office than women. So it's not really a gender thing.
Wow, thank you for that.
I also think that it's becoming more and more appropriate to just express ourselves, both men and women. Yeah. And I had a corporate retreat with one of my companies several months ago, and we were all very passionate about, our mission and what we were doing and the progress we were making in achieving that mission. And I had both men and women crying. So, I think it's just becoming okay to just be who we are.
Yeah.
I was going to add to that on the other side. I too am a crier, but I tend to be fairly confident when I am put in a corner, or again, using the reference to the expo last year with, who are you to produce an expo? I think part of it is, as we are following our dreams, following our passion, creating our businesses, we've got to stop feeling small about them and stop feeling like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, or maybe I don't have the knowledge, and it's part of that, just own it. Like, if you're bringing something to the market and you've got something to sell to your friends or your family or your community, and you know it and you've researched it and you're passionate about it, you don't need to give an explanation. And so when you have those difficult conversations, like, why are you doing this? Or, this is taking time away from me or my family or the children, or you have to just be confident and not feel like you have to give an explanation. This is something that's passionate to me. I'm confident about what I'm doing. I'm going to deliver this. It would be wonderful if you could help me and support me, because I'm going to do it anyway. And really just not allowing it to be difficult. I guess being assertive and confident is how I've managed to push forward to where I'm trying to get to, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well done. Thank you. Really.
There's
well
another
done.
little tip that I have that I find really helpful. Sometimes when I feel like, oh, why bother? It's such a schlep to do this, and stick my neck out and get it bitten off. I say to myself, if I don't do it, then I'm not really setting an example for the next generation, and we will not change it. And so we have to be brave, because otherwise the next generation will inherit the world that we inherited, and nothing will change.
That's so true. Thank you. That is so true.
I'm just going to jump in, and then we'll continue with the next question. And the one thing that I wanted to say was, being brave doesn't mean your voice doesn't shake. And I know in the last 6 years where, I've sat on our local government's, municipal politics, and politics is not always easy. And there's been many times with some pretty tough decisions that my voice would shake and tears would come in my eyes. And I think it means that as a woman, you're not just making the decision from your head. You're making it from your heart. You're making it with your whole body. But I think it adds another depth and perspective to the level of conversation. And I very much try to own what I'm saying. I don't feel it comes across weak, but I don't try to hide my feelings, because there are some emotional conversations and decisions, and things aren't always easy, but you still need to do them. So I know one of our women who we'll be talking to next month, she's just written a great book about empathy and about not being afraid to show emotion as leaders. But I think that is one of the fundamental things that need to shift, that we need to be okay, and there is a strength in showing those emotions. So just before we zip on to the next question, because it does dig deeper, and I am going to mute everyone again just for a minute, I wanted to bring up a technical point that my good friend Heather's raised to me. Now, I don't see it because I guess I'm the host, but if you make sure that your chat is open when we go to this round next time, if your chat feature is open, then you'll see a little place where you can actually raise your hand if you've got something to say, because not everybody is visible on screen. So I think that's another way that I will be able to have a look and see if someone has a question the next time we do a bit of a free-for-all. One comment from Connie, which I appreciated, is working with countless males in her profession for over 20 years. She encountered many challenges. She recommended a book called Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott, and that's in your chat box if you want to make a note of that. So thank you. So to dig a little deeper, the second question for our guests, and I'm going to mute everyone, and hopefully that doesn't include my co-hosts. Here we go. Now.
I just unmuted myself.
Great. Okay. Hopefully I've done that right. So if there was one solution, behavioral change, tangible action, however you want to think about it, if there was one solution that we could start taking or making today in terms of moving women forward, as we just finished talking about, what would that one thing be? And what would the very first step of that one thing look like? What do we need to start talking about more? Perhaps that's it. What is it that we need to start doing? Behaviors that we need to start changing. So I'm really looking for specificity and to be able to dig a little deeper. And again, if I could ask to start with Fiona, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, the thing that I think I've noticed over the years is that men and women speak different languages, but yet we interpret each other through our own language. And if you see two little girls, they tend to build relationships based on equality or subservience. I love your hair, it's so pretty, it's like my mom's hair. Little boys, my dad's car is bigger than yours. So they tend to build relationships based on power and hierarchy, and that translates itself into the corporate world. So one, you need to be authentic. You still got to be yourself, but I think being really aware of how you're being understood by men and making sure that that's what you intend. So as an example, I'll give you a little example. I used to run tax practice at EY. So 800 professionals, this is in 2004, $250 million. And I was at a client event, and I walked up to one of our most important clients, and I said, hi, pleased to meet you, I'm Fiona. And I'm going to call him John Smith. John Smith, who reported to me, walked up behind me, put his hand out, and he said, John Smith, leader of the international tax practice. The client thought he was my boss. And women so often introduce themselves with just their first name and do not position themselves in the hierarchy. So understand that men will think you will demote you in terms of power. So I always say to people, practice saying your name and practice saying your title as well. And so that there are so many examples of things that we as women do that are misinterpreted by men, misinterpreted as a lack of power, lack of authority, lack of importance. And so watch out for those. And what I do if I'm doing a really important presentation to a client is I go and practice it with one of my colleagues, and I say, be ruthless. Just make sure that I'm coming across not bossy and arrogant, but authoritative and powerful.
Fiona, and I'm going to ask the other ladies if they would mind doing. How would you introduce yourself now?
I say I'm Fiona McFarlane. I'm the managing partner of EY's British Columbia practice, and I'm the firm's chief inclusiveness officer.
Okay. Thank you. And Margot, how if you're in a situation like this, a new client meeting or a dinner party, and you're talking to some men, how do you introduce yourself now?
I have to think about that. If it's a situation like Fiona described, where it's a client event and, stature and hierarchy are important, I think like Fiona, I would make a point of establishing the hierarchy and where I stand in that equation immediately. So, and I always pick up the phone and I say, Margot McAuliffe, and that, I know, to Fiona's point, that a lot of women, when I was in law or, in other businesses, would introduce themselves, pick up the phone and just say, Margot speaking or Susan speaking or whatever. Whereas I've always just used my first and last name. If I'm in a situation like with our franchisees, for example, at Subway, where everybody knows who I am, then I actually downplay the hierarchy, right, to make people feel comfortable. So then I only introduce myself by my first name. And sometimes people, within the franchisee population may not know who I am, but it's not as important for me to establish the hierarchy. So I think I would, make the decision based on the particular situation. One thing that Fiona does point out about how men and women are different is that, when we get to know, I believe that women, when we build relationships, what someone does for a living is less important to us. So in social situations, I rarely ask people what they do for a living. And that's actually potentially a disadvantage, not because of the hierarchy, but because of networking. Sometimes in social situations, we meet people and they can help our business, and they want to help our business if they understood what we did. And I actually make more of a point of asking that question now, what do you do, or what company are you with, or things like that. One, it shows interest in the other person, and two, it could help build, my network. So that's something else to keep in mind as to why you might want to dig deeper into knowing what people do and who they are.
Good point. Liza, how do you introduce yourself?
Well, because of what I'm doing right now at this particular moment, and it's funny because I just did radio ads last week, and so I'm Liza Rogers, producer of the Victoria Real Estate Investment Expo and founder of REN, the Women's Real Estate Network.
It just rolls off your tongue.
And so, it's, having a title of producer is kind of fun.
Yeah, neat.
So can I just add one other thing? And just
certainly, yeah.
In the chat box. One of the things that women don't realize is that business is a stage, and the boardroom is a stage, and there's a lot of rehearsal that men go through before they get into the boardroom or into a business meeting. And I don't mean that they necessarily stand in front of the mirror and rehearse, but they will position themselves and all of the players in such a way that when they are in a board meeting or, in a meeting generally, they will know the outcome before the meeting starts. Mm-hmm. So I think that one thing that women should appreciate, this Kim is saying, position and power is not important to me. You know what? It's not important to a lot of women, but it's important to a lot of men. And sometimes if you want to make inroads, you got to do what's important to them. So to Fiona's point, you have to establish yourself in that hierarchy. So think about it as a stage and think about how you want to portray yourself on that stage.
That's actually a really good point. I'm holding up my day planner right now. I don't know if anybody can see it, but it actually talks about off stage, on stage, and backstage.
Right.
When
Cool.
in our days, we need to be thinking about, are we working behind the scenes? Are we working with our team, or are we front and center leading the charge and being on stage? And so that's when, every box has to be checked, and you've got to be ready to actually lead from the stage, whatever that stage might be, if it's the boardroom or a conference or a meeting or whichever it is.
So I'm going to move on. Thank you for participating with those, because I love the tangibles of how do you introduce yourself? I think it's important to hear that. And I do agree with Margot's point. When I go into a meeting, I'm not trying to be an opportunist, but I'm very clear with what I hope, what I intend my end game to be. So if it's a coffee or a conversation, I have clarity in that opportunity of what my end game is. I have a strategy, and I think a lot of women shy away from that because they don't want to be seen as an opportunist. They don't want to be, it's just about being clear of where everybody's time and energy, where your time and energy is focused. So I do agree with knowing what your end game is in a certain situation and why you're there, like why you're having that. But we will open it back up again in a couple of minutes here. So if you've got a comment or question, please save it. You might totally disagree with me, and that's totally okay. Margot, I'm going to jump in over to you. And if there was one solution, one behavior, one action, one conversation that we could start to take action on today in order to make this shift happen and take ownership of, what would it be in your mind?
So for me, it's about taking personal responsibility. So, there's a lot of situations where, something might go wrong, or, we might not be happy with a particular, decision that's made in the office. And instead of me dealing with it head on, much like I did with the CEO drawing the line in the sand, we might go to HR, or we might go to a colleague, or, we might complain about it at home. And for me, I believe that if we take responsibility for everything, I tell people I take responsibility for the weather, and the reason is, if we believe that we have responsibility for it, then we can change it. If we don't believe we have responsibility for it, then we feel disempowered. So for me, it's believe that you are responsible for everything and find a way to address it. Find your power and deal with whatever it is that confronts you. And I'll tell you a story without getting into a lot of detail. But when I was a young lawyer, I was approached by the then managing partner of the law firm, and he made a sexual advance to me. And not to downplay, his conduct was completely inappropriate, but I could have gone to HR and I could have, complained about sexual harassment, but I didn't want to do any of that because I felt that would disempower me. So I took personal responsibility, and I made a point of, when he came into the office the next time I saw him, I waited for him so that I could control the situation when I next saw him. When he went into his office, I gave him a reasonable amount of time to get settled in. And then I went into his office and I just walked up to him and I extended my hand and I said, hello, good morning, John Smith. I just wanted to say hello. I hope you have a good day. And I walked out, and I had never done that before, but I wanted him to know that I wasn't intimidated by him. I wasn't afraid of him. And I wanted to control the situation when I next saw him. And that was it. It was over. He didn't do that again. But I held my ground, right? Mm-hmm. So that's an example, for me, of taking personal responsibility and just dealing with something head on. Of course, if he had continued to be, to make advances, I would have sought additional assistance. But that's where it ended in that circumstance.
Mm-hmm. I love that quote. If we believe that we have responsibility for it, that's when we can change it. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've thought about it that way, but I think that's a really valuable valuable quote. I got to think about that some more. Liza, in terms of that one thing, what that next step, what's right in front of us that we can take action on now?
Absolutely. Well, first, just to add to what Margaret was saying about personal responsibility, if we don't take responsibility, then we're a victim of our circumstances. If we take responsibility, we're actually looking to the future. And anytime you look at the past, you're not going anywhere. So just to add another layer to that, because I really believe in that as well. And when you take responsibility, that means that you're setting forth a plan to the future, and that's where we all need to be looking and focusing. So I'll leave it on that. But what I mean, my biggest thing, and I think, Shar, you and I talked about this the other day, delegate. If I can give anybody some advice on how to get to the next level and how to, one of the comments that came up that I noted was, where are you best spending your time and energy? Where do you need to be focused so that you can be bringing in the big dollars? If I have to do my house cleaning, I'm not making the $10,000 sponsorship phone calls. If I need to do my admin and enter my contacts into a database, I'm not making the $10,000 phone calls or sitting down and having that $10,000 meeting. So for me, the single biggest thing that has pushed me forward and done it with greater speed is to get stuff off my plate and delegate. And sometimes when you're just starting out and you look at the budget and you think, oh my goodness, can I pay $15 or $20 an hour to a bookkeeper? And when you do the exercise of sitting down and saying, okay, if I fit in 10 meetings this week and one of those meetings ends up being a $5,000 meeting, I may have just paid for my housekeeper or my admin person for 6 months. So it's really, again, getting used to how you're going to scale up and how you're going to replace yourself in some of the easier tasks, and really focus your energy where your expertise should be. And that is the client meetings, the being on stage, the great phone calls, the difference makers, and get someone else to help you with those other things. And for me, that is the biggest action that I can recommend. And for me, that's the action that changes everything.
Yeah, if I can build on that a little bit, there's actually some research that shows that in offices there's work that's office housework, so it's necessary, but it doesn't advance your career. But you may be told it does. And then there's glamour work, which is that sort of career shaping, career advancing work. And so I always say to these young women, if you join something where it's only women, might be the office social committee, or it could be, running a charity event, or etc. You have to understand that it's probably not going to advance your career, and that you're doing it to feed, if you want to continue doing it, it's taking away from other things. So from your family, from your friends, from other work, do it because it feeds your soul, but understand it's not feeding your career. And then you can make a decision about whether to do it. But often women and minorities tend to be the ones doing the office housework.
Yeah, very good point. I'm going to ask the women on the call, think about it. I'm going to tell you a short story to prompt you, but if you don't have a burning question or a comment right now, I would like you to think about, just so we can go over to the comments in a few minutes and read what comes up. If this question was posed to you, what's one solution that we could start taking charge of today? One, behavioral change, tangible action, new conversation, however you want to think about it. But what's the one thing, and what would be the very first step that you would take ownership of if we woke up tomorrow morning? If you have something you'd like to offer as a solution, I'm going to ask you to throw it into the chat, and we're going to have a look at them in a minute. So to buy you some time to be able to think about that and answer that question, I'm going to give you my answer. So I had a conversation with one of the amazing women here on the Sunshine Coast on Monday, and we were talking about this webinar. We were talking about and I was trying to get the point across about some of the bits of conversation that I was thinking about. And I said, you know, the one thing that I've noticed about women that I don't notice with men is we try to be good at everything. So we try to have a decently clean house, and we try to be a good mother, and we try to be a good friend, and we're definitely trying to stay on top of our health and have a decent body, and we're trying to be a community leader and be involved in volunteering, and we're trying to be a good sister. So we've got all of these buckets, and we're doing a decent job, a bit above average of all of them. We've got a decent body and decent health, and our house is reasonably clean. And you know, I'm not condemning any of that. But what I notice is men are a little different, and they'll pick and choose what area of focus they want to just go for. And other areas of their life may suffer. They may decide for a few years that they're totally focusing on their career. And they may not, you know, they may suck at relationships, or they don't even take care of their house. Like they have a housekeeper or something. But I noticed that men zero in on a focus and they escalate their success in that certain area, and then, you know, they'll trade off, or they'll figure out how to accomplish the other things, whether that's by delegating or hiring people, or just saying, that's not my thing. You know, I'm not involved in that. That's not my thing. Whereas women, we spread ourselves as thin as we possibly can in all of these areas, because we want to be decently good at everything. And for myself, I've figured out a bit of a solution on how I play with that, and it goes back to, you know, athletics, because sometimes that's how I teach myself things. But I'm curious, you know, that is one area that I have observed with women that I think, not saying that it's good, bad, or otherwise, but I think it's held us back in certain areas, because that's just how we tend to operate. And so that would be my one thing, is to have women really take a look at all of the different roles they're trying to play, how they're actually doing at them, how they're playing them, and could any of those roles be played differently? Yeah, so just curious. But and I'm going to ask you, I'm going to unmute you again. And I apologize, I did turn my ringer off on my phone, but my iPad is ringing right now. Apologies. What would it be for you? What would it be? Anybody that hasn't piped up yet, and I don't see any hands or anything. So I'm just going to say, if you're unmuted now, you should be. Unmute all. Yep. What would you start taking action on tomorrow? What would be your one thing?
Charlene, that's, if no one else is going to speak, I'll just jump in. That is really huge. We are decent at so many things. And the action, what would that action be? Because we would have to cut somebody out or something out. It's a question of prioritizing, but it is not a simple solution, is it?
Yeah, and I'm yeah, Kim, go ahead. I've got a bit of a thought on that, but I'll share it at the end maybe.
I'm not sure how to put my hand up in the chat. I
don't know. Yeah, don't worry about it. I'm not sure how to find the hands. So no, all good.
My one thing going forward, and it always has been, is similar to what your story was, Margot, being responsible and accountable for my actions, my words, my story, my direction. And hopefully by that modeling, setting the stage for other women, young women. I've got a 21-year-old daughter. I never have expected and never will expect anything to be handed to me or to be given to me. It's all on me. And it's all on us. I think we have a collective responsibility. So, and I really liked what Margot said. I mean, that's a perfect example, you know? Something doesn't go the way I want it to go, I'll deal with it. But to not deal with it, and then say later on, you know, poor me, or gosh, I wish that would have gone differently, without taking action, That's my one thing. So.
No,
And that's a very snapshot of it. You know, of course, there's the support and the collegial support that goes along with it. You know, I'm not an island, but it's all around responsibility and accountability.
We have time. We've got 5 minutes. We've got time for 1 or 2 more comments before we close up. Is there anyone that's got a burning comment or question that they'd love to add?
So, Charlene, I know I've had lots of opportunity to speak, but I just want to add something to what Kim said. It's about putting ourselves first. And boy, that's hard. But remember on the airline, you know, when they tell you when the oxygen mask comes down, put yours on first and then assist someone who needs help. So we have to look after ourselves first, and we are really bad at that. Yeah. So I think, you know, if we stop and just figure that part out, I think we make a big difference.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I've got something to add to it as well.
Please.
So two little things. The first is my New Year's resolution is be kind to myself. So give yourself a break and don't try and beat yourself up because your thighs don't look good or you're not good at cooking or whatever it is. But then the other... I've got 2 children, a daughter and a son. And my daughter came home and she was sobbing. And she, what's the matter, Kate? Oh, I only got 93 and I should have got 97. The world was coming to an end. And my son comes home and he goes, 60%. Oh yeah, oh yeah. And the sad thing is that with that kind of attitude, he'll go further. Because as human beings, we are attracted to people who have confidence in themselves. Mm-hmm. And so my message is sometimes you have that horrible little voice inside your head beating yourself up, but your audience doesn't need that. You're not doing anybody a favor, you know, blabbing all your own insecurities. So fake a bit of confidence and actually you feel better for it.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Couple of great things I'll just mention that have come in the chat, and one is from Heather that is just cultivating a practice of mindfulness. Something very tangible that we can do, like literally committing to some meditation. Marianne says, I'll say no more often. And Sean says, I'll stop apologizing for being busy and unavailable. And I love that. Mm-hmm. And when we send out the recording, I will share a principle that I very much believe in called periodization, and it's an athletic principle that I pull into business, but it just basically means you cannot be epic at all things at one time. You cannot be, and it is okay to decide which pieces of those life you absolutely want to excel in to an epic level, and then trade off from there and trade off from there. And I've played with that in my business. I've played with that in bodybuilding. I've played with that in politics. I decided I was going to adjust things and I was going to make a difference in my community. And it is a principle that I feel pretty passionate about, and I want to teach other people. It's what athletes do. They don't always train 110% for the Olympics, but yet, and athletes do this, but yet why don't we learn from that and pull it over into our own lives for success? So I'll share a little bit more on that. I want to thank everyone from the comments that are in the box to the guests that are online today. And I know these very busy women, as all of us with full schedules, have appointments at 4 o'clock. They have made time for their schedules. I will be following up with this recording and letting you know what our next date is, February 26th, for our next conversation. And if you have any feedback, what you'd like to see happen with these conversations this year, I'm dedicated to continuing to move the dialogue forward, and you're a big part of it. So thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for hosting, Charlene. This was great.
Have a great afternoon.
Thanks a lot.
Lady.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.